Welcome back to CanAg UnPacked, brought to you by Footprint. Wayne Easter and Jack Wilkinson are both indisposed this morning, but our special guest today is farmer and former Vice President of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Welcome here, Humphrey.
It's a pleasure to be here, Bob. It's always good to talk to you and to talk about agriculture across this country.
Humphrey Banack farms in Alberta. Tell us a little bit about your farm, Humphrey.
We have a family farm here. We've been here for over a century already. I farm right now with my brother, my son, and my nephew. There's four of us. We farm about 9,000 acres here in central Alberta, so we're a fair-sized farm. It's fully family operated. We do have one full-time hired man. We are strictly a grain operation. There's a few cows starting to come in now with the price of cattle being up, and so my nephew is starting to get into the cow business. So I think we're a well-balanced operation, and we've been here many years, and we hope to be here many years further.
Well, that sounds like quite an operation. But, before we get into some of the issues we want to talk about, and we've got quite a few, there's a couple of rumors I think we need to dispel immediately, rumors that I heard about you. One of them is most couples have a his and her towel rack. I heard a rumor that on your farm you have his and her combines. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. Yes, my wife, we have two combines. My wife runs one combine, a John Deere 780, and I run an 8230 case. So, yeah, we have his and her combines on this farm.
Well, so much for dispelling that rumor. I guess it's true then. The other rumor I heard is that when you do your production costs and your input costs, you have a budget line for beer for you and your staff. Is that correct?
We do. Yeah, we do have a budget line for beer. Every day we have a post-day meeting. Everybody has a beer, and then we all go our ways to finish the day. That's a typical day for us. So, yes, there is a line in our budgets for beer.
Well, and we'll leave it to the viewer's imagination whether that budget line or that number is as high as your rail freight costs or your fertilizer costs, but we'll leave that one alone. So let's talk a little bit about farming in your area or in Alberta, or I mean you may even talk to farmers in all of the prairie provinces. What's the mood out there? Did you have a good spring? What are the growing conditions like?
The growing conditions across Western Canada are very variable. As always, it's a big area. What happens on our farm and what happens 5 miles away sometimes can be very different. On our farm this year, from one end to the other, over the acres we farm, we had one end of the farm that was wet, and the other end of the farm that was very dry, and that's over a 30-mile spread in distance. So right now we are desperately needing water. Our canola crops are suffering coming out of the ground, and we're starting to lose some of the bottom leaves off of our cereal crops. So they're forecasting some rain over the weekend. We're hopeful that will happen, and we can move forward. But right now we're desperately in charge of need. As I understand it, the Peace River Block, talking to people up there, they're probably a little worse off than we are. And there are some large areas in Saskatchewan that are suffering from lack of water. So I think a good soaking across the whole prairie provinces would be a welcome thing for farmers across the country, across Western Canada.
Was it wet in spring?
No, it wasn't. Personally, I don't know where the snow melt went. We had the snowmobiles ran here beautifully all winter, and that can be an anomaly for us to get enough snow to snowmobile properly. But there was all kinds of snow for snowmobiles. There were lots of use of them out here. But when the snow melted, I don't know where the water went. Whether it was that dry and it went down. Runoff was limited. The creek that runs through our property will usually run for 7 to 10 days pretty hard, and this year it was 2 days and it was gone. So I don't really know where all the water went, and like I said, right on the northern end of our farm, there wasn't much we went around. The south end, yeah, we did have to go around some water, standing water, but I don't know where the water went over the winter.
All right, so you probably say it's kind of typical, right? There's always part of the season where you need less rain or more rain, and in the end, things often work out quite well. Tell me, go ahead.
June and July are typically our wettest months of the year. So, we're waiting for that, for typical to kick in, and we'll go from there.
What are the farmers saying about prices?
Prices are volatile. Every change, every news story can be so drive the market one way or another. The markets are watching the news feeds lots out of the States, out of Canada, trade issues, tariffs. We're watching that very closely. I mean, and for us to watch it, by the time that we see the news and can do any kind of reacting to it, the markets have already done it. They're watching this very closely. Our challenges with China over canola trade into China for pork, canola and pork trade into China is challenging. They're one of our biggest buyers of bulk canola, and canola meal and canola oil are tariffed there. So I guess we'll hopefully our government can get and sit down with them and come to some kind of deal to have these tariffs reduced. And I'm sure the pork industry would love to see it too, because there's a 25% tariff on any pork going into China. So all these things are playing into the markets. Now we get into summer and weather is here, so now we have two really big variables that can daily drive our markets up or down limits because of news or weather. And typically, historically, it's been more weather, but in this news cycle we're in, news is being as big a driver as anything.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about trade a little bit later, but I also want to talk about prices in the context of future contracts, because farmers can always hope for a good price to land when they want to sell their grain. But as you know better than I do, a lot of farmers sell their grain in future contracts, and that can sometimes come back to bite them. But let's leave that for just a little bit. So all other things being equal, yes, you have drought, you have flood, you have too much moisture, early frost, late frost. Since the really bad grain prices in the early 2000s, have grain farmers been making money in the last 20 years?
We had a real build up there after COVID. In 2021, 22, we saw a real run up in prices because of shortages of grain around the world. Now they're starting to slack off. For us, we're seeing $1 a bushel drop in anticipated wheat prices from 2024 crop to the 2025 crop. That's going to cost us, that'll take $50 or $60 an acre out of that crop. We're not seeing reduced input costs or any other costs reducing. So it's going to be a challenge to find that $50 or $60 this year on wheat. Some of the other crops are doing better. Canola has very tight supplies, Canadian supplies right now. We see opportunities to price that in very profitably. So it's always a balancing game as to which crop will be best. And I guess we're looking forward to the June 25th Canadian seeding intentions to see where they come out, and they'll play a big thing on the market in the future in Canada.
Sorry, say that again. What's happening on June 25th?
The seeded acres, Stats Canada seeded acres report will be coming out. So we'll see if acreages have changed much in Canada, if people recognize that wheat might be a tougher sell, and we'll see a fair drop in wheat acres or up in barley or any of the other ones. So that's the next big thing we'll look for in our marketing plan here.
I once heard someone complain bitterly about those forecasts because they said that what that does is it moves the price fictionally. Like like you say, if suddenly it shows that there's a lot of wheat acres, the prices and the future prices drop, and yet not necessarily will that be reflected once the farmers actually harvest their wheat.
Absolutely. this is one of the earliest reports we get of the year. There'll be more reports coming. Supply and demand reports will be continuing to come out of Stats Can as the year progresses. But this is the first real report as to what it hopefully is actually in the ground. It's all statistics, so there is variability. There can be variability in the numbers they give. So absolutely, this report can drive the market.
So what you've been kind of describing is that prices go up and down, input costs go up. They normally don't go down, depending on the circumstances, I guess. But what you've been talking about is basically more profit or less profit. But I haven't heard you say that grain farmers really overall have been losing money since, say, 2005.
Every operation will have a different bottom line. Depends on how it's operated. And losing money or making money can be
It's relative. Yeah, it's relative. We know that,
it's
right?
relative. If you own all your land and you're not making land payments or rental payments, the gravy for the farmer is entirely different. What type of equipment you decide do you want to run, all those things can be different, and that's a business thing.
If you want to have his and her combines,
yes, if you want to have his and her combines, that's rather than having one big one that she drives by herself and I don't get to do anything. So,
I should mention that Humphrey's wife's name is Terry. We shouldn't be talking about her like she's part of the furniture. Terry, I know Terry works really hard on the farm, right alongside you, and I know you guys don't only work hard, but you also have fun doing it.
yes,
Okay, you talked about market prices, and you also talked about input costs. You touched on our trade war with China and the U.S., and I've said quite a few times before, it's a good thing that our federal government, was fairly aggressive with trade agreements, because I know certainly you mentioned the pork industry as well. In the CPTPP, the pork and the beef industry both got a bit of a leg up, certainly in Japan and in Vietnam. It didn't include, the CPTPP didn't include the U.S. Of course, U.S. signing agreements doesn't say much these days. And so these trade agreements were good. Would you say that the input costs and market prices have been directly impacted by what's going on with China? For example, have canola prices dropped because of the 100% tariff in China on canola oil and meal?
They dropped $2 a bushel in 3 days. Okay, they've since recovered. That's markets, and that's the biggest thing dealing with markets is however people have money in the market and they want to protect that stuff. When the tariffs were announced, we were down at 12 and 12.50, between $12 and $13 canola. Today we're back to $15. So, the markets take their time and say, okay, so the 100% tariff is there. What will it actually change things? Will we be able to find other spots? Will we, now we're seeing that there's going to be tight supplies coming out of the end of the year because demand has been so good in the past that we're going to come out with like 8 or 9% carryout in canola this year, which is very small. And so the markets took that into account and said, well, we still need to buy the canola. So the markets did recover. It took longer to come back than it took to go down. But things like that, announcements out of the States, if Trump were to say tomorrow he's going to put a 25 or 30% tariff on Canadian wheat going into the States, I'm sure it would change the basis we're charged here for wheat and from our suppliers in Canada, and they would drop the price immediately and then see where the market comes out to. It may not affect us much in the long haul, but those things definitely have impacted our grain prices.
Well, you've just described the markets really well. I mean, there's panic and it drops, but then there's caution on the way back, and so it always takes a little more time to recover. And of course, talk about a tariff on wheat. Look, I mean, this guy in the U.S., it of course makes no sense, as you well know. He talks about reciprocal tariffs. We have reciprocal tariffs in agriculture with the U.S., right? Yes, and they're at zero. Why should they be reciprocal at 20%? Reciprocal at zero is a much better idea. Have the input costs been impacted by these trade shenanigans?
Fertilizer is probably one of the more volatile things here because of the possible tariffs on gas and natural gas and things like that. We haven't seen any tariffs yet on fertilizer. The chemicals now, we're seeing a rise in our ingredient costs for our glyphosate and our chemicals. And I expect that over time the dealings with China may have some, because a large portion of our products are made in the States. I would expect to see some of those tariffs work their way through. Tariffs take a while to work their way through. We are forecasting, or we're planning an increased cost due to tariffs and the tariffs on our chemical side. We're hoping that it doesn't affect fertilizer. The biggest challenge with fertilizer is that our price in Western Canada, where all our fertilizer is made and a whole bunch is exported from, is our price is based on the New Orleans landed price, and it really doesn't matter what the costs are to produce nitrogen in Western Canada. We've seen some very low natural gas prices, but we don't see that benefit being right next door to a fertilizer plant in Western Canada, because all our prices are based on New Orleans prices. And
you and I have talked about this. You and I have talked about this before, Humphrey. The fertilizer you use, it's certainly the nitrogen fertilizer you use, is probably made in your backyard, and yet your price is New Orleans plus freight, or even the Canadian dollar. Even though it's made in Canada, the Canadian currency can impact on your fertilizer prices as well, which we don't have enough time to try to figure that one out. It's been like that for years. The best you could do, I guess, is try to avoid as many body blows as you possibly can when you try to do your planting plans for spring. Tell me something. Has this trade? This started almost right after Trump's inauguration. I can't remember how soon after he started on this tariff rant. Did that impact on farmers' planting intentions?
I'm sure it did. It impacted the markets, and farmers are watching the markets, making their production plans. I would expect to see some lower canola acres because of the Chinese tariffs, for sure. And that came about because of the tariffs on electric vehicles, from the previous administration and the Canadian government. But yes, when the markets change, there's not a lot we can do as closer we get to planting time. But when it comes time to plant, our plans are pretty much there. But through January to March, sometimes there's some fluidity in there, because you can change acres. It's difficult to change some acres away. But as a whole, our acreage doesn't change much on our farm, and most Western Canadian farmers don't. But this year, with the lag in the wheat that we foresaw, and the markets foresaw, this is probably one of our biggest canola percentage on our farm in history, because we saw that we felt there'd be more opportunity in canola and barley than there is in wheat. So those two crops over the winter both stepped up in acreage.
So after February, you didn't really make any changes, drastic changes?
February, March, it's pretty tough. You've got your seed lined up, your fertilizer. We prepay, before year end, we prepay most of our fertilizer costs, and probably 70% of our products are already booked in. We can make some changes to that, but it's more difficult. So, and for us, rotation. We have to, we can't seed canola on canola, wheat on wheat, so it's very important for us to look at what we can do, and our changes are as much balanced by the bottom line we're projecting as where we can seed stuff. There's limited fields we can seed oats on. Oats might be the most profitable crop we can grow, but when it comes down to logistics, handling that much volume, and what fields can be seeded, with the chemicals we can use on oats, we can't really bump that acreage a bunch. So,
right. Let's back to China and canola. Yes, we know that China retaliated because of the tariff on electric vehicles from China. But at the beginning, they were going through the motions at the WTO with regard to anti-dump. Doing the analysis on harm, et cetera, et cetera. But I still maintain that when China saw what Trump was doing, they said, to heck with WTO protocols. Let's just slap a 100% tariff on canola right away without going through the motions of determining harm and determining whether Canada was selling it below cost of production, et cetera. Now, having said that, and it looks like they're creating problems again at the WTO, which really the WTO in my mind right now is almost 100% dysfunctional because everybody's looking at what the U.S. is doing. We know that the U.S. isn't going to comply with the WTO, and they certainly are not, currently have not, and are not complying with domestic support entitlements that they got out of the Uruguay round. We know that they've blown that cap some time ago already. And so really, what do you think Canada needs to do? Should they drop the tariff on electric vehicles?
I guess it's always hard to sit here as agriculture and say that our industry is suffering because of a different era, a different sector. But as Canadians, we have to look at what is good for the country. The Chinese do import. We import multitudes of items out of China. Their production costs are lower. Their quality may be lower. Things like that are challenging for our producers here in Canada to get to. I think that I don't know whether to drop them. I don't know how effective they are. I don't know, to have 100% tariff on electric vehicles that aren't going to be coming into the country. I think sometimes the tariffs are put on too early before we actually see how many Chinese electric vehicles do we see on the street. I don't know if I've seen one. I'm not in big urban areas, but are they a threat to our Canadian industry? And I think that has to be the discussion has to be held. Do we see this as being a real threat to our industry, or do we just put them there so that we ensure that there's not a threat? But
that's a really good point, Humphrey. So is the threat of Chinese electric vehicles bigger than the harm to our canola industry? And yes. I would hope that they're doing that analysis, right? But of course, this is also about populist policies and public relations, and so we know there's a lot of support for the auto industry, and even if it appears like they're preventing a disaster in the auto industry, even though it's minimal, it has a lot of support. Let's talk a little bit about rail. Humphrey, we know that Canadian grain farmers in the prairies are the furthest away from tidewater of any other grain farmer in the world. And so you are reliant on a robust, vibrant, competitive rail service and rail freight. Tell me a little bit about that. How is that currently going? Look, we've got lots of horror stories about railing grain to Vancouver, but how is it currently going?
Right now, there doesn't be any strife, but that's news story steadily. There's always one challenge or another for railways as we go forward. The duopoly that we have on rail freight in Canada is a challenge because when I'm dealing with a particular grain terminal, they only have one person to deal with their grain through. So it's very difficult for them to make deals. Say let's see if we can cut some of our rail costs here. The duopoly manages that pretty well. It seems every couple 2 or 3 months we seem to have some part of challenges within the rail system, and that usually comes down to unions and dealing with employees. So when a railway shuts down, that we have a flow of grain coming off our farms for cash flows and for logistics. When any one part of our system, now whether it's the longshoremen in Vancouver or Montreal, they can throw as big a curveball into the transportation system as the railways. We do have a regulated rail system in Canada, and I think that it's provided Western Canadian farmers mid to fair, work in the past. I know freight rates for U.S. goods are much higher than our Canadian freight rates. So sometimes we have to be very careful how far we want to push with the railways. I know that asking for better service is important, and I would push it past the railways to service right through the entire delivery system, whether it's grain elevators to time it hits the boat. Those are all challenges for us, and those costs are constantly driven back to my farm gate. If there's an increase in cost down there, they always seem to work their way back to my paycheck.
Well, I mean, let's face it, right? Canadian grain companies are basically cost-plus marketers, aren't they? Because as you say, every cost, whether it's because of delays, whether it's because of breakdowns, whether it's because of rain in Vancouver and they can't load vessels, whether it's because there's 50 ocean-going vessels in the parking lot at Vancouver and charging demurrage. And, of course, that all goes back to farmers as well. You mentioned the rail freight cost in the U.S. Now, keep in mind, though, that in the western U.S., they have an option, right? They have the Mississippi River system. And so does that not discipline the rail freight a little bit for those grain farmers?
They have a much more competitive rail system in the States than we do. Like I said, when we started talking railway, the duopoly is a word that has been used in the past to discuss how we have here. To have running rights, for any railway on any line would take some of that away. But then you get into the maintenance costs too. So I mean, it's a long, hard discussion as to where it could go. Definitely, there's more competition for grain movement in the States than there is in Canada. And distance is probably part of that. Like, we cannot ship our grain to Vancouver on a truck.
No, exactly. We used to talk about railways needing to build more redundancy into their systems. Has that happened?
They're trying to make sure that they've come up now in the last couple of years. They come up with a grain transportation plan, how they're going to move the grain for the year. They provide that in August for the coming year. How closely they follow it now, and this past winter we didn't see any much challenges through the mountains or cold weather, so that did help with grain movement. I mean, it's hard to plan redundancy in any operation in Western Canada when we're dealing with climates, and those kind of things. Hopefully there's something built in there how they can operate, when they come into dealings with their employees' challenges. And hopefully they're working through that, and the rail plans do show some of that sometimes as to how they would work through these challenges with employees.
All right. You're involved in, or at least I know you use short-line rail from out of your farm. Tell me a little bit about short-line rail. What does it do to alleviate some of the issues you might have with the two major rail lines? Or is that not why short lines are there? What is the purpose of short lines, and how has it given you a leg up?
Short lines can reduce the amount of transportation, farm transportation of grain. The short line that I'm involved with, Battle River Rail, runs through east central Alberta, through an area that was being abandoned by the two major railways, and producers along that line would have had to move their grain a much further distance. The Battle River Rail has set up a grain buying option. They have a Purely Canada Food. They have a company in there. I think it's Purely Canada Foods that is actually buying grain along the line, which gives that option rather than dealing with the major grain terminals. The challenge again there is their cars are pulled to the end of their line into Camrose, and then they're spotted for CN to move. So they only have one supplier of cars to their operation. And they're still fully reliant on CN service to them. I know that they've expanded some of their products to include oil. There's some oil facilities along the line. So they're looking at different ways, and what it does is as much my support of it is the support of the communities along that rail line. You know, when you lose the elevator and that you lose that community support along the line. So we have done, I think, fairly well as a short line railway and in managing that. And I think that they're important, like I said, to service areas where CN and CP have said they're not interested in servicing anymore. And I know that Saskatchewan has a good number for exactly the same reasons.
So what it does is you aggregate the cars in the area, the geography that you just identified, and they go down to a line and picked up either by CN or CP. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. We CN or CP will drop the cars, and then there's a set of we have a set of locomotives with Battle River that will spread those out through the rail line, and when they're reloaded, they get moved back to Camrose and spotted on a siding, and then they're CN's responsibility and management.
Well, and I mean that was the problem, right? The freight cap that the railway lines got never changed, even though all the terminals were closed, and suddenly farmers had to truck it twice or three times the distance
Yes.
that they used to have to truck it, and so they had to pay for those additional transportation costs as well. Let's talk a little bit, Humphrey, about grain companies and grain contracts. I know that a few years ago, there was a lot of farmers that got trapped in grain contracts where they had contracted for a fairly high price, didn't have the yield that they expected for drought reasons or too much moisture reasons, or simply didn't get the yield that they were expecting, and then had to buy canola. Had to buy canola for they contracted at a certain price. Then when they had to try to fill their contracts, they had to buy canola at a much higher price to fill the contract. Is that still going on? Has that mess been resolved?
No. I mean, on our farm, we are probably, I'm going to say 25% sold of the crop we just planted. We have it contracted for delivery. So we're very cognizant of that level. The last week through the spraying process here, my brother was running a sprayer and he said, shut down the sales. He said, because no more sales until we see where this is going. We may be a little long on some of our crop sales already, as to what we actually can produce. I mean, we have produced less than we have sold. So we're very careful as to get there. And I encourage farmers I talk to all over, if you want to forward contract grain, you have to take that risk, a risk reward. Like if you want to contract 70% of your crop, at a better price, you better hope you get it, because there's the risk that you can't get it and you'll buy at a higher price. Personally, on our farm, we were caught on an oats contract where we over-contracted oats, and it ended up short, and we had to buy it out. It cost us cash. We had to cut a check to get ourselves out of the contract. The company we were dealing with, there was little or no flexibility on their side as to how we could manage this, and went through some negotiations, and we ended up cutting a check to get out of that contract. So it can happen, and I encourage farmers, whenever I talk to them, to be cognizant of, look at it as risk rewards, because if the reward can be much higher, realize that there's absolutely a risk coming with this.
So what you recommend is some caution in doing that, and of course it's always okay to gamble with some of your production. I know that
we don't look at it as gambling. We look at it as locking in a bottom line. Okay.
Yeah. No. Exactly.
Sure, the prices are good, but we don't look at it as gambling. We look at it as looking at our production and our business plan, saying, okay, this is profitable right here. Let's lock in a profit on a certain portion of our crops. We don't know what the other portion is going to do, but let's lock in some profitability. So.
Well, sure, exactly. Lock in profitability, but on the flip side of that, also lock in enough to pay for your input cost and gambling with the rest, right? Because
Yes.
if you think the price is going to go up, fine, it's okay to gamble. You've got $500,000 worth of input costs in the ground, It's okay to gamble
1.2 million.
with prices to an extent, but I know some farmers, they lock in enough to at least pay for the input cost,
Yes.
and then they take the risk on
Yes.
the
On
rest of
our
it.
operating costs, yes.
You know,
That's how we-
I want to go back quickly to something that I missed earlier in asking you, and that is currently I don't think Carney has imposed any retaliatory tariffs on anything that impacts on agriculture. Is that correct, or am I mistaken there?
As I best understand it, there are no retaliatory things that affected agriculture. And that's not saying it can't happen tomorrow. Dealing with the United States and the volatility and decision making down there, we don't know exactly where we're going to go in the future. And like I said, we do our best to manage that on the farm. Take some of the volatility out of our business plan. I in the articles I've read on Carney I don't think he's a big retaliatory. He doesn't view retaliatory tariffs as the best answer. He's more into negotiation and stuff, and that's the stories I'm reading. I am a news junkie, and from my previous life following politics, and I think he's more into negotiating rather than the tariff side. So retaliatory tariffs. What tariffs come out of the States is
It
impossible.
seems like Carney is trying to settle down Trump a little bit, right? Settle him down and see where it goes from there. But on the positive side of that, Carney also seems to be very clear that if he imposes retaliatory tariffs, that the revenue from those tariffs go back into the industry that's impacted.
Yes, those have been the comments that I can attribute to him. So it's yes, he has said that. Sometimes I think that the tariffs in the States are there as a cash grab sometimes to cover some of their government's promises for spending. Rather than they've absolutely promised no tax increases in the States, and we all know if you run a business, there's budgets and money going in has to match money going out. And sometimes, just from my opinion is that I see some of the tariffs coming on just to match that outflow cash demand. Whether or not they're truly going to help things, we can always discuss, where the cash comes from. That'd be another 40-minute discussion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we understand it, right? But certainly the electorate in the U.S. did not understand that it's a way for government to raise their cash flow, increase their cash flow, and the consumer ends up paying for it, correct?
In most cases, yes, the consumer ends up paying for it. I mean, yeah, it's a weird way to do it, but that's my personal opinion. I think it's some of the tariffs now are just to increase cash flow for the federal spending.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about as far as farming or agriculture is concerned? Because we want to get into a topic that you are kind of farming in the hotbed of an issue that's going on in Alberta. Anything else on farming?
No, I guess it's I think there was a time when agriculture and farming was looked at as a culture. Today, I think the more we look at as agriculture and farming as being businesses. I mean, that's exactly how we look at our thing. At the end of the year, we sit down and we say, here's what we spent, here's what we brought in, how can we do this? I mean, we spent 3 hours one morning at our morning meeting going over why did it take us 28 days to seed our crop? What things can we change to do that? So I think when producers and everyone out there looks at agriculture as being a business, I think it will be a more successful industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. I mean, you're absolutely right. The bibbed overall pitchfork lifestyle farming days are over. Farmers now have to be just as good at looking at a balance sheet as they are at operating their machinery.
Yes, they do.
And so they are businessmen and women around the world. And I think there's a lot of awareness about that. But the other issue with farming and agriculture is that there are so many exterior policies that impact on farming, right? And this is why it's also very important that the public is willing to allow some tax dollars to go to helping the industry when it is needed, because they're impacted by an exterior policy. A good example is tariffs on electric vehicles from China, right? If that creates a problem in the farming industry, then there better be tax dollars to help that situation.
Yes, the government support programs we have are critical to making this work. There are no, on our farm we look for 7 to 8% return on investment. There are very few industries in Canada that will operate on that kind of return on investment. And we've been here for a good number of years, and we see that consistent return. But typically to have money invested in one of the biggest industry in Canada, that kind of return, we need to make sure that there's some the government can provide some stability to it, so that one decision or one weather event doesn't destroy an industry.
Talking about lifestyle farming, you will remember when the Europeans started with their common agricultural policy. And you'll also remember that back before the end of the Uruguay round, Europe was spending somewhere between $75 and $90 billion in paying farmers for different things, painting the fence or creating nice scenery so that when tourists drove through the countryside, or even when domestic tourism were driving through the countryside, they wanted it to look picturesque and beautiful, and so they paid farmers for doing that. And I once approached the European Agricultural Commissioner from the European Union, and I asked him, I said, how do your taxpayers tolerate you spending upwards of $75 billion in supporting farmers? And he looked at me and he says, it's quite simple. He said, most of the taxpayers in European countries are well aware that if farmers can't make it on the farm, they're coming to the cities, they're going to take your jobs away. And so they would rather have them use tax dollars to keep them on the farm than to flood the urban areas and be looking for jobs and taking jobs away from those that currently had them.
And
okay. Go ahead.
To follow that up, I think that the consumer in Europe can remember the wars and times after the wars when there was no food, and I think that there has been a time. I think that those memories are fading, and I think we're going to see less support for that. But I think that was part of the thing, is that we will be reliant on food. I mean, I saw it as my time with Vice President CFA. Policies out of Newfoundland, where 90% of their food is imported because they don't grow much. They had huge policies developed by the provincial government to move forward with food production on the island, not be reliant on the ferry bringing them food. And I think that is Canadian consumers as one. If you walked into a grocery store today and saw an empty grocery store, it would change the mindset of Canadian consumers as to knowing where their food actually comes from. But food is ample in Canada. We can go to the grocery store and get whatever we want, whatever our whim gets, just about any time we want, if you're willing to pay a price for it. And until some of that changes, I think it's going to be difficult to continue support for agriculture, because people don't look at agriculture as being their food source.
You talked about safety nets. Are the current safety net programs working?
Yes and no. I mean, on our farm, we haven't seen a real need for a big safety net. We haven't seen a huge drop in income. Most of them have been suffered. The safety nets, and it's hard to build one that doesn't address everything. The safety nets that my son needs, starting farming, are entirely different than the safety nets that I need, as being an established long-term farmer. Right? The needs that the challenges and the risks that I face of bankruptcy or of not being fluent, money fluent, are much less than him. So. For young farmers, yes, I can see, moving to get young farmers in, that would be one of the biggest things you need is almost a self-designed program to cover some of those risks that they're taking on. My son is well off because he has the bank of dad. But there's a lot of producers out there that don't have that. And those beginning producers that don't have the dollars and cents, the numbers behind us, and it's just not experience. It's the money fluidity that you have. So yes, the programs are there. Our crop insurance program is absolutely critical. We use it constantly. Ag Invest, it's a program that we all participate in, and Agri Stability, I said, is a program that we haven't got to yet, and we hope we don't have to.
Exactly. Yeah. You sometimes hear farmers complaining that they didn't get a safety net payment from the government, and then another farmer will look at them and say, well, what are you complaining about? If you didn't need it, you should be happy, right? Okay, Humphrey, you live in Alberta.
Yes, I do.
You also happen to be living in the riding that Pierre Poilievre is going to try to retain his House of Commons job. Tell me a little bit about the politics in Alberta. We know that there seems to be, this is what we see, right? This is why I'd like to ask you about it, because you're on the ground there. What we see is there seems to be a growing number of people in Alberta that would like to separate from Canada. How close to that actually, how close are we actually to having the majority of Albertans vote to separate?
I don't think we're close. I don't. In my mind, I'm going to say 30%, 30 maybe 35% would support something like that. I guess it's the feeling that we're the lost cousin when it comes to policies and recognizing the things that are important to Alberta. Our industry is. Both the Canadian and Alberta governments. Budget lines are based on oil and gas, and sometimes those things are forgotten in the discussions. There's huge numbers of dollars that flow both into Alberta and into the Canadian, coffers, government funds, and through taxes and royalties to both of those governments. And I think sometimes that goes unknown. So, as a Western province, we do feel sometimes left out. But we do, in my mind, we do live in a democratic society. In the last election, Carney was successful in garnering more seats across the country. And, a couple of years ago, my wife and I took a tour. We drove across Canada to Niagara Falls from Western Canada. And just driving through the 905 region north of Toronto, just lets you see how many people are there that that are represented by the 905 area in Toronto. That you drive by miles and miles of subdivisions. So the mood in Alberta, yes, as you mentioned, I am in the Crowfoot Battle River Crowfoot riding. This is where Pierre Poilievre has mentioned that he will be planning to run. There is some conservative support that may fritter away, but I don't think it will be an issue at all, because I think that the current MP we have at 83 or 85% of the vote in this riding. This has been one of the safest ridings in Canada for 25 years. For conservative support. I hearken back to a story my father-in-law told me back when we saw government change from the social credit to the Conservatives in Alberta in 1970. My father and mother-in-law went over to Mom and Dad's house in the same yard, and Grandpa was there. Grandpa Kennedy was there, and he was talking, having his coffee and whatever. And he looked over at them, and he looked and he says, "Which one of you two guys didn't vote for social credit last night?" And in their little riding they had of Kelsey, I'm thinking there was three votes for social credit, because he looked up and he said, "Because Mom and I both voted, Grandma and I both voted social credit. One of you two guys didn't." And I think that's sometimes the thing we have here is we've voted Conservative in this area for so long that we don't look at the benefits from one side to another. We just continue to go down the same path. So,
Okay,
it's very safe riding for Polly.
Yeah, let's back up a little bit to the people that would like to separate. What surprises me is that no one has engaged in the discourse and talked about what would happen. What would the results be if Alberta separated? Have they looked at border crossings between Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC? Have they looked at the passports? Have they looked at what would happen to the currency? Have they looked at how would you rail your grain to Vancouver? Would it have to go through a border crossing? Saskatchewan and Manitoba would have to export their grain through another country. Like, why has no one brought up some of those issues? Because that's something that also happened in Quebec far closer to the end than it did during the time that the discussion started and as it started percolating and growing. I have why wouldn't someone bring that up already?
I guess the proponents of staying in Canada want to minimize the discussion. We could have all those discussions you want, but it just inflames the rhetoric. I mean, when I sit down personally and talk to people, and if I meet someone like that, that's a discussion I'll have with them personally. But I don't know if it would help the discussion as a whole to bring all these ideas up, because it just gets the discussion going more than it's really necessary. I mean, our provincial government has shown a propensity to remove anything federal. I mean, we've talked of getting out of the RCMP to a provincial police force. I think that's probably moving ahead. Getting out of the Canada Pension Plan. So the leaders aren't really interested in quashing these discussions.
Well, then, I mean, your biggest resource is oil, right? And that's got to get out of a landlocked province as well somehow. Yes. I can't imagine that the cooperation of building pipelines through other provinces would increase if Alberta separated. But let's talk about your riding. You already have a prime minister from Alberta right now. I know the guy running in your riding, he would like to be prime minister. Hey, you're looking at two possible prime ministers from the province.
I guess, as a Conservative supporter historically, I'm looking to see, will he maintain this seat in the future, or is this going to be a one-off year? Until I can hear those answers, I'm kind of holding back on my thing. You can say you can have a prime minister in the next election from our riding, but will he choose to stay here? And does he understand the sense of rural Canada? Central eastern Alberta is a way different can of worms than an urban riding in Canada. And to understand the needs and wants of our communities, of our our ag society in Roundhill, is an entirely different thing than dealing with a parents' association in downtown Ottawa. So,
my guess is the trauma that he experienced when he lost his riding in Ottawa will prevent him from ever moving ridings. If he wins in your riding, I don't think he would like to take the risk. Tell me something, is there a chance that a separatist candidate might run independently in that riding?
I mean, it's an open process. I don't want to start. There is a lot of separatist sentiment in our riding. It's probably fairly much higher than it is in urban areas. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, as I best understand it from what I've read, is that the riding he ran in Ottawa had 80 or 90 people on the ballot, and that was probably one of the things that hurt him there. Is that he had a very, very large ballot that he was running against in Ottawa. And whether people see that as an opportunity to go one way or another. And with the sentiment, it would not surprise me to see someone run on a separatist independent ballot. But I guess time will tell. We're waiting for Mr. Carney to announce the dates, and then we'll see where the bear comes out of the buckbrush.
Well, the other challenges Poilievre has, of course, is when he runs in that riding, he will have to be very if his ambition is to be prime minister, he's going to have to be very unequivocal about his position on separation. Yes,
I think he's going to have to work very hard to. Some of those questions will be asked, and I guess. I'm waiting to see it. I know in the federal election we just had, there were some town halls held across some candidates forums held across our riding, and it'd be interesting to see if those will happen again, or whether the appetite for them in a by-election just won't be as high. So I know I attended one in Camrose, just to show the feeling around here. We had 5 candidates on our ballot. We had 1 candidate show up for the candidates forum, our conservative one.
All right, Mr. Banack. So
it's a very different riding than.
All right, I want to thank you very much, Humphrey, for giving us a good look at your farm, a good look at the dynamics in farming in Alberta and in your area, as well as a good look at the dynamics in grain farming overall. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll have you back. Good luck. Good luck this year with your production year.
Yep. We're going out to move oats right now. Get ready for sale. So
great. And say hi to Terry.
Yeah, she's listening.